The Center for Educational Media and the College of Education at Middle Tennessee State University are proud to offer professional development to K-12 educators in Tennessee through our online video library. These videos are aligned with standards set by the Tennessee Department of Education. For more professional development videos, check out our website at cem.mtsu.edu.
Time for our first activity. Now that we have geography and maps of early Tennessee on the brain, this is great because we're going to take a more in-depth look at a couple different ones. So we're going to talk about Cumberland Gap, Wilderness Road, and their impact on early settlement. And Library of Congress doesn't have a whole ton of primary sources on those things. Now it does have sources that were created after that time period that we're talking about. So those aren't exactly primary sources for the 18th century, but we'll bring that up later too. So it really starts, or I'm going to start talking about it in the context of the Proclamation of 1763, which was one of the consequences of the French and Indian War, where this line, and of course lines are, they're not created on the landscape, they're only created on maps. And so it's not like anything that people on the ground can see or even know exactly where it is. So I always think it's funny, this idea of boundaries on maps. But here is one that was created, the Proclamation Line of 1763, between this orange and this kind of peach colored sections here. So what was the purpose of this line? Do you remember?
So you were not supposed to expand past that.
Yeah, who wasn't supposed to expand past that?
Colonists.
Right. So here you have all the colonists in the English colonies, the Eastern Seaboard. And as we saw with Dr. Busey's talk, I mean, the whole story of the United States is just expand west, expand west. And this is supposed to stop that. And so what's on the other side of this line? This is where the Native American tribes were trying to be like, keep out. So what do you think happened?
They ignored it.
Who ignored it?
The colonists.
The colonials ignored it, I'm sorry.
Yes, exactly. And did they ignore it on purpose? Did they ignore it by accident? Probably a lot of both. But mostly on purpose, I'm sure. So what kinds of geographical features do you think that this line covers?
This is the Appalachian Mountains.
For sure.
Okay, yeah, so those would be kind of along all the way, actually they go all the way up to Maine, don't they? So here you have this line and you're just setting up people to break it, right? And so enter in the Wilderness Road. And but here's an example of a person who's gonna break it. And this is a letter that's written by none other than, I don't know if you can make that up.
Washington.
George Washington, yes. And don't worry, I'm not gonna make you read this, but there is a section of this letter that we are gonna take a look at, and here it is. So, the other matter, just now hinted at, in which I proposed in my last to join you in attempting to secure some of the most valuable lands in the King's part, which I think may be accomplished after a while, notwithstanding the proclamation that restrains it at present and prohibits the settling of them at all, for I can never look upon that proclamation in any other light, but this I say between ourselves, than as a temporary expedient to quiet the minds of the Indians, and must fall, of course, in a few years, especially when those Indians are consenting to our occupying the lands. Any person, therefore, who neglects the present opportunity of hunting out good lands and in some measure marking and distinguishing them for their own, in order to keep others from settling them, will never regain it. If therefore you will be at the trouble of seeking out the lands, I will take upon me the part of securing them so soon as there is a possibility of doing it, and will moreover be at all the cost and charges of surveying and patenting, etc., because he was a surveyor, you know. After which you shall have such a reasonable proportion of the whole as we may fix upon at our first meeting, as I shall find it absolutely necessary and convenient for the better furthering of the design to let some few of my friends be concerned in this scheme, and who must also partake of the advantages. Now that's a mouthful, and I doubt your fifth graders or even your high schoolers are going to have an easy time figuring out what that says. So I would just recommend you paraphrasing it to the class, pointing out specific phrases. So what would be a couple of the key phrases here that you would want to point out to them to get to the gist of what George Washington is saying about the Proclamation of 1763?
Well, that it's only temporary.
Yeah, a temporary expedient. And so this is the place where your students learn what temporary expedient means. And I'm sure that they have experienced this from their parents a lot, but just didn't know that's what it was called, right? Okay, and so what is he proposing that people do?
Let's go ahead and go hunt and find our good spots and stake claim now before everybody else gets to.
Yeah, and there's that word opportunity again. Of course, it's spelled slightly differently. And this is the whole driving force, really, behind settlement. I see an opportunity. If we don't take this up, somebody else is going to get it. So it's more important to snatch this opportunity than to abide by this. It's really just... They just did this to appease the Indians. But look, a lot of the Indians, they don't mind. A lot of them don't mind if we come, right? I don't know if he's actually right in saying that or not. But I'm sure this was an argument that people used to justify their actions. So yeah, this is the attitude of George Washington. So you can imagine that a lot of other people followed suit. And I actually, I'm going to show you. That letter is linked where it says original document. And here's the excerpt that was transcribed from that as part of this feature on the Library of Congress teachers page called American Memory Timeline. And so this timeline has different primary sources it pulls out for each era of American history. So this was a letter that he wrote to his pal William Crawford in 1767. So this is before he's president. This is for the Revolutionary War. So this is where he's a land surveyor and he's getting rich off of this, right? And it also makes him very familiar with the lay of the land, which helps out when he's a general. So this is what is going on. And in the context of don't settle past this line, oh, but we're going to anyway, so how do you convey people into these new lands that are opening up? This is where the Wilderness Road comes in. So people like Daniel Boone. And Daniel Boone, yes, he was a long hunter. He was also hired by a company to go out and scout out lands to see, what they were like and how to get people there. And this is from a portion of the Library of Congress website, which if you're not already familiar with this one and you teach fifth grade, then you should be because it's really nice. America's Story. This is totally for fifth grade reading level and they have a lot of different features on it. Anyway, so this is just a couple short years after that letter that we just read. Daniel Boone is finding his way into Kentucky, and this is how he gets there, the Wilderness Road. So he's one of the prime movers in this new settlement pathway. And I got this map from the website of National Historic Park. This is a really good way to find resources is if there's a state park or a national park or wilderness area or battlefield or whatever, go to the National Park Service website and you should be able to find some good things that you can use in the classroom. So that's where I got this. And this is a nice map that shows where the Wilderness Road picks up from the Great Valley Road and goes into Tennessee territory and hits the Cumberland Gap there, and then, turns right into Kentucky. And here's another look at it. Oh, right. This is to show you, I'm going to superimpose on this the map that we saw earlier. Yeah, this kind of matches up. So you can see where the Wilderness Road is. We are way far off the map now. We are way far past that Proclamation Line, no return. And so here's another one of the maps from the Park Service website. It's a close-up where you can see the saddle of the gap where the Wilderness Road actually goes through the mountain range. So the topography is visualized on this map when it really is harder to see on the other. So you can see this is the best place where you can get through. And I am the kind of person that I always go into Google Maps, and I always try to look in both like the map view and the satellite view to see like, what does this look like today? Can I see it? From an aerial view, can I see? Because remember, the way that the land is shaped has a really big impact on the way the state gets settled. And so the fact that there is a gap there is of utmost importance. Now, because I believe in context and because I believe in content, there are a couple things that I'm going to pass out that you can give your students in terms of learning about the Wilderness Road, what it is, when it was created, and that kind of thing. So these serve the same purpose. They're from two different sources. I want to give you one of each so you have it and you can choose and you can see. The first is an entry on the Wilderness Road from the Tennessee Encyclopedia of History and Culture, which is an online encyclopedia. Just about everything that has to do with Tennessee history and culture is going to have an entry there written by scholars, including Dr. Busey from across the whole state and beyond. So has anyone ever used the Tennessee Encyclopedia? Good. This is excellent, especially for high school level readers. And so we link to a lot of these entries in our lesson plans and in our newsletters. I mean, you could go to Wikipedia, sure, but this one was edited and published by UT Press and the Tennessee Historical Society, and my boss was for a time the editor of it. Now, the other one is a content essay written for teachers by the resident teacher at the time working with the East Tennessee Historical Society, specifically for curriculum materials. So if you've ever gone to Teach Tennessee History, that website is great. Lisa Oakley and her crew do a fantastic job, and we partner with them whenever we can. And they're in East Tennessee, so their East Tennessee, early Tennessee resources are particularly good. So I'm not saying you have to read both of them.
They have a really excellent lesson plan on secession.
Oh yeah? Yeah, they do. They're really good about giving these kind of content essays as a way to, if you want, you can give your students to read for background, or you yourself can read for background to help you with your class discussion. So take some time to read one of these or skim both of them as you wish to learn more about the Wilderness Road, and then we will come back to our activity. Okay, so I'm going to ask the who, what, when, where questions first. So who was instrumental in creating the Wilderness Road?
Daniel Boone.
Daniel Boone.
Okay. When?
Dr. Thomas Walker.
Dr. Thomas Walker, right. And when was this?
1750 to 1775.
All right. So this was actually starting before that letter that we looked at earlier, and this is something that continually gets more and more carved out. And where? We already saw it on the map. Why?
Settle. Opportunity.
Opportunity. This is going to be our answer to everything now, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And then the question that we always force our graduate students to make sure they know how to answer is, what is the significance of this historic site?
It enabled the settlement of Middle Tennessee. For us, that's the important part.
Right. So, I mean, because settlement in East Tennessee they were coming through a different way. This is how we get to Middle Tennessee, by bypassing the Highland Rim and going into the fertile area, the Central Basin. Okay, excellent. Now, oh yes, here is another look. There's so many, of course, these are meant to be driving maps also when you are at the park, and so that's another reason they have these modern routes on them, and you can actually drive part of the route, which is pretty cool. The green shaded part is the part set aside to be the park, so you can see it follows the ridge line. It's funny because you can see that when the railroad comes in later, the railroad, of course, has to go through here. That's the green line. So everything has to kind of fit in this tiny little gap right there. And it becomes very strategic during the Civil War, of course, but we're not going to talk about that right now. Now, I have 2 maps. I'm going to divide you into 4 groups because I have 2 copies of each map. And so each group is going to get a copy of a map, and you're going to put it together because it's in pieces. Now, this means, and this is good because you have to get up anyway for lunch, I'm going to make you get up right now, and I'm going to make you clear your desks and move tables together because these maps are large. So, see, each group is going to get one of these, and you have to puzzle them together. So, in that case, can we have you 3 be a group, you 3 up here be a group, you 3 there be a group, and then the back row be a group, because we need 3 groups of 3 and 1 group of 4.
We're all blank.
Okay, that's right. No,
Yeah.
that's right. That's
That
right.
is-
It's going together.
Yeah.
So this is
Country.
No. Shut up, Matt.
That looks,
yeah.
okay.
Breaking.
Have you found the Cumberland Gap?
This is Maryland. So this is like where Nashville-ish will be.
So then
So it's gonna be east of that or northeast of that.
Let's all look at the first one of these. When do you think this map would have been created? Do you have an idea?
It's got to be, obviously pre-revolution, so maybe even into the 1750s or a little earlier,
Okay, so what makes you think that this is an early map?
because Virginia is claiming half of the South.
Okay, all right, because where is Tennessee?
That's not on the map.
It's not,
Right, the name Tennessee is not on the map. Of course, Tennessee, we all know, is on the map. Okay, so when do you think this map was created?
Mid-1700s, maybe?
Maybe mid-1800s.
Yeah, that's like mid.
This is later. And what makes you think that this one's later?
You can see Nashville.
Nashville declared as the capital.
Right, because we have all the cities, and we know this is a map of the Bureau of American Ethnology. So I'm going to click on these so you can see the bibliographic pages. This one was created in 1778 in London. This is in the midst of the war. Why do you think they would need to publish a map like this in London in 1778? Good. And this one is part of a very large book that has lots of different maps in it. So this one is
I thought it might
1899.
have something to do with the Indian nations.
Yes, this is all about Indian land cessions. So this is 1899. That's a time in our country when finally pretty much all Native American threats are taken care of, and we can write about it. And so this is, like I said, how hard it is to find primary sources for early Tennessee. That map is not a primary source for early Tennessee because it wasn't created during the period of early Tennessee. So that's something that you'll want to make sure that your students know. This, however, is a primary source because it was created in 1778. So I asked them to find where the Cumberland Gap was on here. It's not labeled Cumberland Gap. Did you guys find it on there?
Up in here somewhere.
Yeah.
Cumberland right there.
So that map, I think, complements well the maps we saw earlier from Dr. Busey about the growth of white settlement at the expense of Indian settlement. So what kinds of things can you say about Indian land cessions from looking at that map?
Some of the land cessions actually had geographical separations. To see one land, it might be 100 or 200 miles apart from another section from the same people.
Yeah.
Like you see 3 is here and 3 is here, and that would be one cessation, or section.
Right.
I think it just shows the population of the Native Americans in Tennessee.
Yeah.
I mean, to show that a lot of the state was eventually given over, you know.
Yeah. And one thing I like about its being a newer map compared to this one is that students can see these cities and places that they've been or that they know about and be like, oh, well, I live in smack dab in the middle of this particular Indian land cession. And so they can think about where was it that their land came from. In the other lesson idea that looks at a couple other old maps that are come a little bit after this one of the activities is to have your students pretend they're settlers and kind of draw a line of how they would have done it, whether by land, by river, if they just would have come in and stopped at the first foothill that they saw, how far they would have gone, and that kind of thing, as a way to get students to really pay attention to geographical features. Because one thing, when you're looking at maps that are more modern, like that one back there, the features are more political. You've got the names of cities, you've got these boundaries that are determined by entities in the federal government. Whereas here, we don't have as many of those yet because it's less explored, it's less claimed, and so you have more of an emphasis on the geographical features. It's like when you ask somebody for directions to a store and they're telling you pass the farm and at the big tree you turn, as opposed to go 0.5 miles and turn on Elm Street or whatever. It's a different sense of how you read the land, and this is by geographical features. So you can have your students point out all the things on here that are geographical features, including not just rivers and mountains, but all the other little things as well. And on that one, they're more cities, towns, block houses. There are rivers on that one though, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Are there any railroads on that or not?
Some roads are mentioned,
Some roads?
like the Cumberland Road is mentioned, but
Yeah. Well, that's good. There are roads on this one too, right? Where are the roads?
This says road.
Here's Warrior's Path. Yeah, there's a road. The roads are these tiny little lines or dotted lines. Here's a road. So it goes to show you what kind of transportation is dominant. And this is the kind of thing that a surveyor does. And that's the kind of thing that a government does, right? So also talk about different kinds of purposes of the maps. This is not from a lesson plan or a lesson activity that's already written down somewhere. This is just a couple maps that I thought would be cool to compare. So there aren't a set of predetermined questions for you to ask your students when looking at these maps, but what kinds of things would you want them to look at or notice?
Bodies of water.
Yes. And where are the bodies of water on this one?
The river, Mississippi River,
Great
Lake Erie,
Lakes.
Lake Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
I think it would be really cool for them to notice how tiny Maryland is and how Indiana is way over here, but it ended up way over here.
Ah, yeah, right. And then here's Illinois country right here.
I think it would be important to show them how all the confluence of these mountains are going to be a pretty big barrier to settlement.
Yes. Now, it's like when you're driving towards Chattanooga on I-24 and you see this wall of mountains and you're like, how am I going to get through that wall of mountains? And then the closer you get, all of a sudden, oh, it's not. It's two walls and there's a little gap. And you're like, oh, that's how I'm going to get through. Imagine if you were on foot with a wagon and you're a wall of mountains. Okay, what am I going to do? And you don't even know, wouldn't you? You know there's a gap because somebody told you. Obviously, you're not just Daniel Booning it. That would be silly with a wagon. Now, again, very, very few primary sources from the time period of Cumberland Gap. So we have to deal with these later images. And this one is from the Civil War era, for good reason, because during the Civil War, like I said, the Cumberland Gap is very strategic because that's how you get things through. And so it was fought over by the Union Confederacy. And so here is a view of that. And so this is a way to get your students to go from aerial view down into like street view, which I would just go ahead and do that on Google Maps. That's what I do too. So here is one view of it. And so this is, you can have them kind of take different forms of media like the images and the maps and kind of compare it. Here's another one, also from the Civil War era, that has a few more features where you can see the encampments of the Union occupation forces and all the tents. And the gap is very, very clear here, whereas it's not quite as clear on the other one. And then here's one of these like postcards from the mid 20th century, where you have your meandering road that goes to the top as an overview, but then you can see where the gap is off to the right. So again, different views from the ground and showing you kind of the impact of geography and how that affects transportation.